us getting back into town this week. That means I'm kind of running everything myself. I'm engineering and multitasking, and that is okay. That just means you get to see the behind the scenes just a few moments before we start the show, because I want to make sure all of our outlets are getting this live broadcast. We're going to be talking about the news and some of the news behind the news. Aha, I've got this. And excuse me while it makes a little weird noise. There we go. Now, you can watch this. We're broadcasting live on Facebook, of course. You can watch us at MyMichelleLive.com. At MyMichelleLive.com, you can see the live version of our conversation today. And it just takes a few seconds to set up. So engineer has the day off. That's okay. I think it's always good, Adam, that I pretend like I know what I'm doing.
You know what? A day off on a Friday, not a bad thing, right?
Well,
What?
no one
But
knew when
hey,
I was
it
going to
all
get back, or if I was going to get back, because I had such a great, freaking great time experiencing New Orleans and Houston, even a little bit of Las Vegas. So yeah.
Vegas. Hey, thank goodness you're a master multitasker, and you've got like the dynamic skills that you might say is a production Swiss Army knife. You know, you can do this, you can do that, no problem. You got it.
I'm also having trouble with Chrome today. I don't know if anyone else is having crazy Chrome problems, but as it is, we are broadcasting, and let's start the show. Here we go.
Let's review the week. The Riz Report with Adam Rizzieri.
We're going to have to fix Big Voice Guy's pronunciation. He's obviously very white, and so he doesn't have that, ethnic flair of pronunciation. No, we're going to be talking about whiteness today a bit because it doesn't go away in the news, and finding balance between a reasonable respect for people. We'll also be talking a little bit about my experience traveling, and I was really surprised to see a Dr. Seuss store in New Orleans, Louisiana, with all of the canceling and all of the pullback. So finding balance there, even some dialogue with a good friend on Facebook kind of points some of that out. We'll be talking about some other news stories and giving you more than what you're hearing in a lot of the reports. And we're going to do it with our friend, Adam Rizzieri. Hey, happy Friday,
Hey,
friend.
hey, happy Friday. Long time no talk. Back in
Yeah.
Seattle. You were in Texas with my people here in the Republic of Texas for a while. Um, Chartered over to Nolans. Vegas. How was Vegas?
Vegas is really quiet. It's fairly quiet. Some things open up on the weekend, piano bars and some things, but really there's no shows. It's just the restaurants are at percentage capacity. But my favorite, I keep everyone's like, I know, Michelle, I know what your favorite thing is in Vegas. That show kept going, and that's the fountain at the Bellagio. So I sit across the street
Ooh.
at Mon Ami Gabby. I eat French onion soup and French bread and watch the show. That's my
That's
Vegas
so.
experience.
Did you sort of feel like you rented out Vegas for yourself? You're like, you know what, guys, put it on the Amex. I'm coming.
Pretty much. I think a lot of people are hoping that it'll open up. In our report this week, we were talking about the Valencia being sold for six something $billion. So that's a
It's like
sign,
Monopoly
though,
money.
that they're reinvesting and they really believe that Vegas is going to open up again.
Yeah, I think Americans are definitely looking for fun and normalcy and the things that, we used to look to for joy in our lives. Live concerts and just events. I was one of those people who, maybe it's because I'm just a crazy Texan, but I went to the rodeo championship at the same place where the Cowboys play, AT&T Stadium, just here in the winter. I went, I wore a mask, of course, but I had a great time doing this at a public venue. I felt a little bit closer to normal, and
Yes.
now that obviously vaccines are rolling out in mass, uh, was it we is the permission I think the hall pass that we get from Biden, isn't that coming for July 4th? I think we're allowed to be in public and be social.
We
No, I mean
we shall see. But I
we
did
shall see.
notice Texas has opened up. We see a lot of the statistics that places that are open versus places that have been closed up, the numbers tend to be about the same. So are we doing this for a reason? But I noticed, Adam, in your state, that where people have the freedom to do whatever they want, they still seem to, in establishments, wear masks, sanitize things, and people tend to make decisions that are best for their health. I mean, we're selfish by nature, and so we make those decisions based on our own circumstances. And it seems that we don't need extreme control in order to be responsible. So there you go.
Yeah, you don't need a rule that says, "Hey guys, don't lick the railing at the mall." You don't need a rule that tells you to not do that. I mean, we can make decisions for ourselves. We know how to wash our hands, and we know how to be mindful of basic things that help minimize risk. But also, there's that cost benefit analysis. Does the risk outweigh the reward? And ultimately, it should be up to us as individuals to make those decisions about how we're going to run our daily lives at the workplace, how we're going to expose ourselves to leisure and entertainment and travel. We can wash our hands. We can maintain respectful distances away from others. We can make sure that we are not coughing with anything other than a shoulder to cough into or a hand to cough into. We can make good decisions that minimize risk, but we don't need somebody to say, by mandate, you cannot do this and you cannot do that. That's not how our society really is supposed to be. That's
Well,
not
it's
in our
not
social
freedom, and we feel it. It's not freedom, and we feel it. So, in my travels this week, I was in New Orleans, Louisiana, the home of the parades and festivals. St. Patrick's Day is a big deal there, but in surrounding areas, there is a lot, like Texas, a lot of freedom. Things opened up. In the city of New Orleans, there really are some restrictions. You wouldn't know it being on Bourbon Street, by the way, but there are some restrictions there. So they canceled Mardi Gras parades and St. Patrick's Day parades and such. And people felt it. Some people, while I was there were some rogue parades for St. Patrick's Day. So there was some stuff going on. And I did get a report that in Chalmette, which is a surrounding area, they pretty much kind of stayed open. They shunned a lot of the extreme lockdown measures. Their tax base, they were only off by about 1%. So they survived economically fairly well, and their COVID testing, they had a really low actually, but it wasn't exploding. So we really need to revisit that government control. But as we look at St. Patrick's Day, we might as well celebrate it right here, right? My background.
Absolutely.
On my mother's side, O'Connor. So, yeah.
Nice. So on my grandma's side, yeah, that side of my family, Irish Italian, right? So the Irish side came over really following the potato famine from the late 1800s, like 1895. And so I've got Yates, got McBee, got McNaney. So I got a few Irish names in the family, but it was my grandma who really carries the Irish blood closest to me. Then, of course, there were a lot of Irish and Italian immigrants that came to New York and signed in at Ellis Island and started their American journey. And that. Ultimately, it all started with my great grandpa being a 19-year-old that spoke no English, just a lot of rizzieri, a lot of Italian. And it's actually really crazy though to think back into history when, it was this potato famine, Michelle, that probably. Well, was that kind of what the sparking, the catalyzing event was for your side of the family coming over to the United States from Ireland?
I believe it was, and I
it
think
was for
that
25% of the entire population of Ireland.
and
Literally.
yet the struggle of the Irish, the stories of discrimination and abuse. This is important that we talk about today because it is downplayed in the media. Because we're seeing memes and we're seeing people talking about, wait a minute, white privilege. What are you talking about? If you're Irish, you were abused. You were not allowed in establishments. You were separated. Even the New York Times and USA Today and other outlets have downplayed slavery, which, the first recorded sale of an Irish slave was to a settlement on the Amazon River in 1612. So while I want you to really pay attention to this, that the New York Times, USA Today, and others have said, no, wait a minute, Irish slaves, that's kind of a falsehood. This is a myth, because they say, well, they were indentured servants. They were indentured here in the United States. And we'll talk more about word games. We're seeing it at the border now. But a slave by any other name is still a slave. And it was not just in America where we saw Irish being used on plantations and the like. This was in other areas of the world. And so downplayed in the media, though. But we've also seen a lot of discriminations and some of the problems, disease that Irish people have had to endure. And while we have a Black History Month and we celebrate Black history, which is from differing regions. Just because your skin is dark, what does that mean? We're talking about an actual people of a origin in Ireland that really have had quite a history.
There's definitely a story there, and like all sorts of discrimination, that also, of course, impacted the ability for these early Irish immigrants to get jobs. And it turned out that you'll see a lot of history in firehouses throughout the United States. A lot of the Irish were unable to get any sort of jobs except for those serving as firefighters. And so you see a deep sort of Irish history with firehouses throughout New York and Chicago and major metropolitan hubs that really did sort of become home base for a lot of these new, these first generation Americans, these Irish who had become Americans. And but this is a story that isn't just unique to the Irish. Back when Jews were fleeing persecution over in Europe,
there you go.
Ultimately, you had literally this difference of German Jews from the other Eastern European Jews, such as those from Poland. And if you listen to stories from, I know I give a shout out to Alan Dershowitz, I think every show, Michelle, but I think he's just such an impressive person. This is a guy who was first in his law class at Yale, and he was also the editor for the Law Review, but he couldn't get a job at over 30 different Wall Street firms out of law school because he happened to be of Polish Jewish descent. So, it's quite crazy to actually think about how discrimination can impact any new immigrant community. And of course, the Irish were not protected from any of that, whether it was persecution from society in general, not being allowed into certain establishments, not being allowed certain opportunities in the workplace, educational discrimination, things of that nature. The potato famine was a real thing. I mean, 1 million people died from that potato famine, resulting in literally the migration of 2 million Irish to the United States. A quarter of their population. It's really crazy to actually think about when you put it in context of the overall Irish population in general. A quarter of them came to the United States. So, here we are now in 2021, and a lot of us have a little bit of St. Patrick's in us. We got a little bit of Irish blood in us. And that's the American way, right? That's great. We have a lot of this. We have a lot of that. That's what makes us so interesting and awesome just as a society. I think that we can kind of come together and look back on our history and appreciate these little nuggets of cultural value that we can kind of look back on and be thankful that we are not back in 1845 or back in 1900. We can be thankful that we're in 2021 and that we've come such a long way.
Yeah, and that we can learn. We're talking history. It's important what you're sharing with us, Adam, because we're not talking about history. We're so busy being offended by it, and we should be. If we aren't offended by history, there's a problem. But we shouldn't be whitewashing it, Can I still use that phrase? And we shouldn't
I don't
be,
know. Not if you're on YouTube.
and we shouldn't
We
be
shouldn't be
erasing
though.
it.
You're 100% right that we shouldn't be. Well, so this all kind of goes into these discussions of, well, really, it's critical race theory, and we just saw this week just a tragic attack on 8 people in Atlanta. 6 of those people were of Asian descent. 4 of them were Korean. And right now, you're seeing in the media these discussions of why and what was the motivation. Was it a hate crime? Was it a sex addiction driven act of violence? Is this just another opportunity to bash Trump and some of the things that Trump said in his past? Or are there some contributing factors here that we should really point to make this more of a real discussion? So with the shooting in Atlanta, gosh, I mean, just what a terrible tragedy. It's just sickening to read about. And obviously, it's hard not to be a human and feel a lot of sadness and empathy for those families. It's really disappointing to see some of the words coming out of the White House. Jen Psaki blaming the quote previous administration and references to the quote Wuhan virus as the fuel to the fire that maybe drove this crazy shooter to do what he did. There was another congressman out of California, and it seems to be these Congress people out of California, but Representative Ted Lieu was basically saying that the former president used racist phrases like quote kung flu. These are what people are pointing to as potentially contributing factors towards this rise of anti-Asian hate crimes.
Okay, let
that
me
we've seen
ask
here
you
in
about
2021.
this. Okay, I want
Yeah,
to stop you
absolutely.
just for a moment because I want to play something. It's Dr. Simone Gold, and she talks about the truth about the COVID-19 vaccine, but something that's pretty interesting to me about uh, our plight here with COVID and then the concern about, well, that was racist, is that this is the first time in history we haven't named a disease after the person or region that it comes from. I mean, you don't see Lou Gehrig's family saying, "Oh my gosh, it's heinous that you would call it, Gehrig's disease." And
Spanish
people,
flu.
thank you. So take a little listen. You're watching live. Listen. Let's see if we can get this.
Disinformation was apparent since the beginning, right? We call this illness COVID-19, but its real name should be after the location from where it arose, which is Wuhan, China. And if you remember, it was called the virus for a while, I don't know, a month or so, before we discovered the Chinese Communist Party didn't like that name. They set about putting a lot of pressure on media and other, politicians, let's say, to change it, and they started calling it the coronavirus. They called it the coronavirus because it is actually a coronavirus, but that became very confusing to doctors and scientists because there are 7 coronaviruses. This is just number 7.
Boom.
So we used to use the word coronavirus sometimes on our charts when we meant a common cold. A person would come into the ER in my case, and they just had a common cold, and I would sometimes write coronavirus on the chart as the diagnosis. So it was pretty confusing for doctors and scientists to call it the coronavirus. Right, so they had to change the name again, and it became known by its acronym, Coronavirus Disease 2019, COVID-19. I have to start there, because it was never a racist or weird thing to call it the Wuhan virus, right? There's so many diseases that are named after the location from which they arise. There's Zika and Ebola, there's Middle East respiratory syndrome, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme disease. I mean, the list is endless. German measles, Spanish flu. This list is endless.
So I'm going to stop it there, but I mean, think
My
about
goodness.
that. Seriously. Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Do you see the people in the Rocky Mountains going nuts, or people, attacking, or because you gave us
Yeah.
this? But there is a lot of money in China, make no mistake. And we see that
Those
with some
darn
of the-
people of Fraser, Colorado.
right? We see this play out where we have this disease and we're saying, well, this is racist. We're crying racism over something that has been long standing. So are we going to now cancel the names of every single disease that was out there? Tie it back to
It's
China.
crazy.
It has money. It has money.
It's
Oh, you
It's
froze up.
crazy to kind
There
of
you
like,
go. You're
it's
back.
almost like oh, it's almost like an excuse to just wash over the reality of what we're talking about here. I mean, and as we've seen overall, just the world of hate crimes in the U.S. actually the instances of them go down by about, I think it was 7% in 2020.
But
The anti-Asian specific hate crimes have gone up by
yeah,
150%. And I think in almost every case, they have been crimes perpetrated by a non-Asian minority group. So it's that is a conversation that we have to really dig into. Um, it's so crazy to say that Trump and the fact that he called it the Wuhan flu for a while, that's a contributor to what we're actually dealing with here. These targeted attacks of literally people in the street identifying elderly Asian people running across the street and literally like shoving them down, in some cases resulting in their deaths. The real cause of it, I think, is what we need to talk about. You know, it's what we're hearing from the White House and what we're hearing in a lot of the mainstream media. I think, Michelle, to your point, is a narrative that's been fueled by money coming from somebody with a reason for them to say what they're saying. They're trying to deflect. And that's just a huge problem. Why are they trying to deflect responsibility from the source?
Look, and we should talk a little bit before we do get into the effects and what was really taking place in this issue in Atlanta. We'll revisit that, and if you haven't heard the news, we'll talk about what that is, what's happening with the attacks on Asians, how is it affecting us? We can talk about that for a moment. I want to just step back and say there is an issue with China. We have selective outrage. We can't watch a professional sports game without having Black Lives Matter being promoted and in your face. And Black lives absolutely do matter. Every life should matter. But why are we still seeing the same people that have blinders on, where the human rights issues come out of China, where Mulan filmed in an area where there are actual slaves? Because they're black, does that not matter? I don't know. But we have selective outrage. China has a lot of money and a lot of pull. If we're going to stand up for injustice, let's stand up for all injustice across the board.
You know what's really interesting is if you talk to Chinese American immigrants that have left China for a very specific reason, a similar reason to Venezuelan American immigrants, they will tell you that what we're kind of seeing here is really what was a precursor to Mao's Cultural Revolution. Back in 1963, Mao launched what was called the Socialist Education Movement. And this was really the precursor to the Cultural Revolution, which literally purged from society all things that were free and in favor of capitalism and democracy and fairness. And in a nutshell, what Mao did was he set the tone for the Cultural Revolution by cleansing powerful officials and questionable loyalties. He had this crazy approach that literally took over control of newspaper articles. It took control of locals, and basically it placed specific leaders in business and specific leaders in society into these power positions to quite literally control the narrative of a nation and to control the people. So I think if you talk to people who have left communist-controlled countries like China, they will tell you that what we're seeing here today is kind of a precursor to something that in other societies has been just terribly, terribly damaging.
I
So
concur.
those are great sources of primary information. Those people.
This is something that I was researching, is some of the effects on propaganda, and that's a lot of what happens when you no longer have accurate reporting. You have spin doctoring. You report one side, you silence a voice. And I have, for the first time, after one of our reports, I had posted some news supporting what you and I are talking about. And I'm telling you, anything that goes against the general narrative, Facebook will take down, TikTok will cancel. why not have, if you have the truth, why be afraid of anything else? Because eventually the truth weighs out. But the problem with propaganda, I was really amazed that they said, the problem with propaganda is that people kind of know they're being led astray. They kind of know there's something off. But here's the kicker, Adam. They kind of don't mind. And here's why. Because it's telling you something you want to believe. It's telling you something maybe that feels good. It's telling you something that you want to be true. You kind of like it. And so you go along with it. You're superior. Or we see this in some of the problems with what we're teaching in schools now, according to race, that we're the white saviors. And so because these poor people are inferior, we have to save them. It makes us feel good. We're not seeing that we're really being supremacists. It's kind of nuts.
Scary to think about. It's scary to think about that people would hear some of these messages and think that way, but you're so right.
Well, it's what
You're so
critical
right.
race theory is all about.
Well, and that's, I think, what a lot of people are sort of pointing to potentially as, in some ways, they're saying it's sort of the result of or part of this greater effort to indoctrinate. It drives really the polarization of ideas, and it literally minimizes the diversity of thought that we have. Critical race theory has actually been pointed to. There's a group there's a group in New York called the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, and it's basically this group of people that know what communism is. They are a group of people that are very educated on how the Chinese Communist Party operates, and they literally point to critical race theory as potentially the most racist thing out there, and how it's so predominantly entered workplaces and educational institutions, really under the guise of being anti-racist, when in fact it's racist as it gets. It's repressive, it's discriminatory, it's divisive. It teaches people to really focus on differences, like why are we different, instead of looking to the teachings of Martin Luther King about how we can be brothers and sisters and how we can unite. It focuses on dividing people, and it also indoctrinates from a really, really early age. And that's kind of part of the game, right? You have to indoctrinate and sort of drill in this theory of CRT to children to get them to kind of grow up thinking and believing this sort of stuff. And so we're seeing school systems now starting to do this, but not in Florida. Governor DeSantis is all over this, and he knows how dangerous CRT is. He knows how unproven this is. This is really kind of communist indoctrination 101. It's part of their playbook. And it does nothing good for anyone. I love this one quote that I want to quickly just read. And so I went to Boston University for grad school, and that's where Martin Luther King got his PhD. So I'm pretty proud of that. But this quote, I think, is so powerful. But it says, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final work." So unarmed truth, that is so important, but you can't have any truth if you have this little silencing of ideas and information and conversations. Unconditional love, how can you have unconditional love if you're being indoctrinated at an early age to feel like you're so strongly different from your neighbor or from the person down the street? When really you have so much in common and so much to share together and to enjoy and to do together. We really, I think, need to focus on teachings from historical leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and by all means reject what some of these school systems are starting to try to teach. The current education secretary actually was responsible for implementing critical race theory in Connecticut when he was running the school system there. So if we don't look at who's in power and what they're doing and ask a lot of very specific questions, we're going to lose ourselves before we even know it.
Yeah, it's crazy because what we're seeing, the voices we're hearing most from the critical race theory and the people who are crying, this is racist, cancel, and the places that are tearing things down, for the most part, are from white communities. Here in the Seattle area, we have a statue of Lenin who has not been taken down. Wrap your head around
That's
that.
crazy.
Right?
How
Right?
is that even there?
Yeah, right. I mean, responsible for how many deaths, and it's just it's inane, and that's fine. Why is it not taken down? Because it's history. I had posted that there really is a Dr. Seuss store in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I just said apparently it's not canceled in New Orleans. And my good friend, whose birthday is today, was saying, well, you know what? Dr. Seuss's family decided to take those books. That's capitalism. She is absolutely right. They made that choice because of caricatures that are in those books. And that's a great conversation
Exactly
to
right.
have, to teach our children. We don't need to make fun of people. Now, you could also say, caricatures. Have you ever gone to a fair and people draw these goofy caricatures of people? Is that racist? No, they're just a caricature. Dr. Seuss, at the time of a lot of the writings of his book, had traveled the world and he saw these things and people, and this is what his art represented what he saw. Can we use that with our children as a personal choice? Can I read this with our children and say, what do you see in that? Is that really what a Chinese person looks like? Is that really what, someone from Africa looks like? And how would you think a picture of you would look to someone that's different? But how are we the same? Can we use that as a learning moment instead of a panic, cancel it all out? I also pointed out that it wasn't just a capitalist move, that it's also many school districts that say, yeah, no more this Dr. Seuss book, that Dr. Seuss book. And I may have offended her because her response was, I'm sorry you have so many problems with school districts. And I don't. I have a problem with not being able to talk about it without being offended. Adam, back to you and how our inability to see our similarities and our shared American experiences has really affected our ability to report and to look at the tragic shootings in Atlanta. Before I get your thoughts on this, let me just play a news report of what took place in case somebody is out of the loop and doesn't know what we're talking about.
And with new developments in that shooting rampage in the Atlanta area that left 8 people dead and the country reeling. Tonight, there's new video showing the alleged killer calmly leaving one of the Asian spas he targeted moments after gunning people down inside. Investigators are now saying there is evidence that Robert Long was a customer at 2 of the spas where he opened fire. Police in Atlanta said today they aren't taking the idea that the shootings were a hate crime off the table. And on Capitol Hill tonight, members of Congress are warning of a disturbing spike in brutal attacks on Asian Americans has now reached a crisis point. And
so that just gets you up to speed on what's going on, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious response, first of all, is just that shooter is just what a piece of garbage. What a garbage person to do that to another human being. My response, though, is I think that this is probably, there are obviously some things that are worth discussing here. These massage parlors, right? There's a question of whether or not these are places that function to perpetuate human trafficking, which is a huge problem in the country. Human
But
trafficking
we don't
is
talk about because of selective outrage.
Exactly, selective outrage. When, as human trafficking is it's a modern form of slavery. These people are in a lot of cases sex slaves. The shooter here is saying that this was fueled by a sexual addiction, in which case that guy needs a lot of therapy and needs some God in his life. Among other things, he's 21 years old. His life is over. Of course, as is the lives of those other 8 victims that didn't deserve this at all. Let's talk about defund the police. I mean, defund the police. You have crimes out of control now in a majority of cities that are typically more progressive cities, right? New York City, San Francisco. This is where a lot of these anti-Asian hate crimes are taking place. This is where this is happening. To think that when you defund the police, that's going to solve certain maybe social issues that are important conversations to have. The concept of defunding the police is just so ridiculous to me because, okay, let's now under resource and underpay the people that we are looking to protect us and protect our communities.
Question.
It's ridiculous. If you want the best people in power, or if you want the best people running the streets, pay them more because it's a really, really dangerous job.
And then here's my question then. You have that argument where our extremely failing schools, and I'm going to say, teachers, you do rock. I know you have it tough. So I'm not slamming you. It's just the argument that we're saying, hey, you want better schools? Pay your teachers more. Not necessarily the administration, not right? Pay your teachers more. So we have that argument where our schools are concerned. How does that logic just escape where police are concerned?
Exactly.
Help me
it doesn't.
out.
If you want better, more responsible police, pay them more, train them more. You'll retain them also, by the way. You'll have police that stick around for quite some time.
Unlike Seattle, they are bailing here. Bailing are,
Absolutely.
By the way,
Can
if
you
you're in
blame
one
them?
of those cities, if you're in
Seattle,
if you're in Portland and some of these areas where they're being defunded, thank a good cop. When you see them out there, thank them. Adam, true story. As the police were being defunded, I was downtown. I saw a couple police officers, and I just said, hey, guys, I want to thank you for sticking around. I know a lot of people are leaving, but thank you for being here for our city. And one of them literally cried. And said, thank you for saying that. I can't tell you what it means.
There was a story of a Dallas cop recently, and basically there was this homeless person on the side of the road, had nothing, and this cop literally took this homeless person to a store, bought this person what they needed, brought them to a shelter out of his own pocket. The city didn't pay for this. And basically a random act of kindness to take care of someone that nobody talks to and nobody really looks at when they're obviously on the streets, right? Policemen and policewomen do so much for our communities that we never see. A majority of cops that are out there are great cops. Of course, there are issues here and there, and these bad seeds. The good cops want to get rid of all these bad seeds, right? They don't want bad seeds making them look bad. The police that choose these professions, that choose to do this for their life, they know that they're not going to be paid a lot of money for a job that's very dangerous, for a job that might expose them to risks that, maybe they end up in jail because they react the wrong way in a split-second decision. It's such a risky position to be in and to hold. But thank God they do it for us. And so to think that defunding the police is any sort of option.
Then you put the at-risk neighborhoods more at risk. And hey, I'm going to tell you, I'm fine putting pressure on the police when there's bad decisions, bad shootings, inappropriate. I mean, I don't know about you. You're probably model citizen, but I've been pulled over and I've had some problems with the way, some of the treatment or some of the attitudes. Put pressure. I believe in that 100%. But we tend to go off the rails and get a little bit crazy. And then we see what we've seen here in the Atlanta
shootings are double in New York, right? Well, there's the Atlanta shooting, of course, but I mean, shootings in general, crime in general is up in New York just dramatically. Crime in Austin, Texas is up dramatically. This entire concept about under-resourcing and underpaying the cops, I think that's going to do anything good? No way. I love what Chief Brown did back when he was in Dallas. He's in Chicago now, but he really wanted to make police sort of a part of the community, not as a police sort of presence, but as a friend and as a resource. And of course, the Dallas police have had their issues over time, but I think efforts towards really kind of embedding the police into communities, not as much a cop or there to police things, but there to be a resource and a community who befriends kids that would otherwise have no friends, and does things to sort of be like this positive example and like this navigator for what the next good decision might be. I think that's probably a better solution towards some of those at-risk communities that otherwise don't have anybody that cares about them. I mean, getting cops to patrol the neighborhoods that they grew up in, I think there's so much to be said for that also. But when you defund the cops and you cut their staff, I mean, they work so many crazy hours. How are they going to be able to make split-second decisions when they've been up for 3 days on patrol?
Wow. Yeah. And let me ask you something. As we talk about this shooting in Atlanta, we do you think that it's hard to get to what really went on because we have this tribal idea of us against them and this color against that color? And so we aren't really seeing all of the nuances and the problems to really solve the human aspect that's going on here. Some of the sex trade issues that we don't care about. We're counseling things like Dr. Seuss, but Cardi B gets an award for, one of a filthy song. And when I say something like that, everyone says, well, she's expressing herself. Men express themselves. Yeah, but women, come on, let's be classier. Let's be better. Celebrate your sexuality, not your sleaziness. But that's okay. And yet we complain when it's the hashtag Me Too's, and it's, when we see issues where women are objectified. And I want to bring this to the border crisis as well. Do you think
Definitely.
that we are ignoring one of the biggest problems with the border? And there are a lot of problems as we look at this border crisis, but human trafficking is huge. You have undocumented people. Oh, we're such a loving country. Come on in. But we don't ask people to do it legally. There are so many children and so many women that are sold into sex as sex slaves, and we only care about the slavery atrocities that took place 200 years ago.
It's really crazy. But I guess if you ask certain members of our administration, oh, there's no crisis. We're not focused on that. There's no scheduled visit to the border to see what's going on there. I mean, Michelle, you're right. So obviously the crimes against these massage parlors brings up this conversation of human trafficking, looking to the border crisis, which that's what that is. That's a humanitarian border crisis that there's always been a problem with the border. It has not been this much of a problem. Why aren't we calling this what it is? We're literally seeing the largest wave of migrants in 20 years now, kind of coming our way from these Central American countries. There's one migrant facility now that has, it's like almost 730% occupancy. You have kids that are taking turns sleeping on floors and showering once a week. But with these thousands of people coming here, unaccompanied children, I mean, shoot, like what is the end goal? I mean, how are these kids getting here, first of all, and what's kind of going on to sort of create this influx of human traffic? This is big business, Michelle. It's really big business for organized crime. To transport people from other countries to the United States for illegal immigration. I actually did a little bit of research into sort of what the payday is for these cartels. And it's so if you're coming from Mexico, the cartels are going to charge you $2,500. Central America, about $3,000. If you're a Chinese migrant, expect to pay about $5,000 to I think they're called coyotes. And if you're coming from Russia or you're someone of Arab descent, they're going to bill you $9,000 for that.
9 to 15, 9 to 15, and sometimes up to 30,000.
Right. And they're not going to make you pay up front. What they're going to do is they're going to know who your family is and where they live. And they're going to know that they're going to make sure you understand that if you don't pay them the money that is owed to them, they're going to go after your family. They're also going to try to obviously go after you when you're here in the States. But if you just disappear, then probably your next call to mom and dad back home is not going to be a very good call. The cartels are literally going to go after your family. So this is big business for organized crime. And in a lot of ways, when Biden sort of made some quick changes to border policy, there was a lot of communications that kind of spread throughout Central America saying, all right, guys, borders open, come on right now. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem.
How many crossings were there in February? You know this statistic.
Literally 100,000 crossings were in February, which is basically a 4 times higher than all but 4 months during Trump's 4 years in office. 100,000 people in February. That's crazy to even think about. And really, it's interesting too because when you look at what we're hearing from our leaders, we're saying, you know what, kids, come on. If you come here, it's fine. We're going to take care of you. This and that. You're hearing all these kind of rosy pictures being painted by our leaders in office, but what you're not hearing anything about is what the Biden administration is telling the Mexican government to do. The Mexican government right now is basically working to kind of do the dirty work that our administration doesn't want you to hear about. They're actually going to have their armed police forces, their National Guard, start to put a serious I don't know, I guess a cork in the neck, right? They're trying to literally stop the flow of migrants coming through Mexico.
And that's great. Thank you, Mexico. I mean, that's fabulous that someone's doing something. But what culpability do we have when we say just come on in? And, we don't want to call it illegal because people aren't illegal. No, but the practice is. And that practice that you're championing, that practice that you're saying we just want to be loving these poor people is causing many children to die and many children to be enslaved and women to be enslaved. And we don't care because we don't know who they are. We don't know where they came from. We don't know how they're being used. And on top of it, their money, instead of coming to our government and having a free way or a very inexpensive way to legal citizenship or to inhabit the United States, their money is funding the drug problem that is causing the homelessness on our streets. It's causing the mental health issues and causing cities like my beautiful city of Seattle to look like a third world nation. That's the result of your unfounded love, where our caring turns to cruelty, Adam.
We
Preaching
absolutely
done.
need to
Go
provide-
ahead.
You're so right on, Michelle. I mean, there absolutely has to be a pathway to citizenship. I mean, I wouldn't be here if there wasn't one. I would be
Me
here
either.
in
We were talking about
Italy
that.
or Ireland I mean, we wouldn't be here. And immigration is what makes our country such a great country. But there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And this way is the cartel's way, and it's not okay. There's a community, or there's a story that people don't really talk about that much, and it's how this impacts actual Americans. Most of them of Mexican or Hispanic descent, living in Texas border towns, people that have literally been running ranches for probably going back to when Texas was part of Mexico or Spain. I mean, people that have lived on this land for decades, if not more than hundreds of years. But these people are living in fear now. These are American citizens living in fear because the cartels are running these smuggling operations, obviously from one side of the border being Mexico, crossing the border, and then all of a sudden they find themselves on private property on somebody's ranch. It's a farmer, it's a rancher. I've actually been lucky enough to go and spend some time at some of these ranches. And as you walk around the border of the ranch, and it's a very routine thing as a rancher to, you get in your four-wheeler and you drive the line of your property to check the quality of your fencing to make sure that, you're not going to have any deer or cows wandering off, because that could be a problem if they're on the highway, right?
Right.
So as you're kind of driving your property line, you'll start to see that there's all sorts of fencing that's been manipulated, right? You'll have people cut your fencing. You'll have people literally fold your fencing down so that human traffic can literally walk over it or under it. And every now and then you'll see things left behind, right? In respect of things recently, you'll see wristbands left behind because that's what the smugglers use to sort of register people. The red bands means one cartel, the yellow bands is a different one, and they use that literally with serial numbers because every person that they're trafficking is registered. Now, if
And we can't even do that.
we literally like they're very organized, but I guess that's why they call them organized crime, right? It's big business, and those guys know how to make that money. But as a property owner, as a Texan, as an American, you live in fear because if you happen to be someone who's known to report sightings of crossings to Border Patrol, if you happen to see certain types of activity taking place, retaliatory violence takes place, unfortunately, more often than not. So there are people that patrol their land with little helicopters, people that have lots of land, right? And they'll see things. You'll see mysterious sacks full of stuff, drugs, money, or nothing at all. Sometimes it's just trash left from the people who are moving from point A to point B. But there's a general fear of what if I report what I'm seeing to the authorities? There are groups of citizens who live fearlessly, who carry guns with them and form alliances, and kind of like these private citizen militia groups that try to work with the government to solve this problem. But Michelle, I mean, I can't imagine living that way. Those are very, very brave people who live on these border towns. All they're trying to do is just live life, pursue happiness, make a buck or two, and pass on some knowledge to the next generation. They're not trying to be people who literally have to live in fear that, when I go to my fields to tend my crop, why should I have to wear a bulletproof vest to do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
we don't think about that as we're sitting here in prosperity in Seattle, in LA, in New York. We're not thinking about that. And, this is a big passion of mine, is the human trafficking. I cannot even, if you have children, you think about that when you think of a 3 or 5-year-old that is being trafficked for sex. That is their life. They become subhuman. We are contributing to that, but again, selective outrage, because we can take down news stories that don't fit with a vaccine narrative or mask wearing narrative, but there are some issues that those same social media outlets have with pornography and trafficking. What the heck?
It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. It's just kind of another example of do as I say, not as I do in some cases. I mean, we literally see just all this terrible, terrible content on Twitter and Facebook, and we know it. We know it's there. The same stuff that exists on these big platforms, let's just remind ourselves that it was this type of content that basically big tech colluded around to take out Parler. Remember that up and coming competitor to Twitter, right? So literally you have Twitter kind of citing Section 230, which is that part of the FCC Communications Act that basically says, hey, listen, big tech, if you guys have really bad stuff on your platform that was posted by third-party users, you are legally immune to repercussions from that type of awful content. If your drunk uncle is on Twitter saying terrible things and spewing hate speech and defamatory content, that's on him, not on you. Now, interestingly enough, it's kind of these, it goes back to inconsistency around how this is policed, right? So with Facebook and Instagram, there were over 21 million child sex abuse images posted to their platforms in 2020. That is insane. Facebook literally had 35 times more reports of child sex related content than Google in 2020. This is stuff that Amazon, Google, and Apple referred to when they were basically trying to say, hey, you know what, Parler, we're going to shut you down. It's really kind of crazy to me to see how big tech continues to use Section 230 to their advantage when it's advantageous to them. But they continue to be inconsistent in how they choose who to censor and who to not censor. We can all agree that this kind of content is awful in every case. And, whether or not Twitter should be sued for having child porn on their platform or not, I think if Twitter wants to make editorial decisions about who to censor and who to not censor, but then they choose to not get rid of this child porn that's on their platform, I think it's time to say, hey, you know what, Twitter, you're not going to enjoy Section 230 immunity. You're going to be held responsible for this child pornography that's on your platform. If you can make the decision to silence Trump from your platform because you don't like what he's saying, well, why didn't you make the decision to delete this child pornography from your platform as well?
That's a very, very good question. Where something is illegal, that's a really good sign. You need to take it down. Where it falls under free speech, that's where freedom reigns. What should media and social platforms look like? It should look like a free exchange of ideas, things that you don't like. That's part of freedom of speech. You're not going to like everything, even some things that may be spinned. But if you have enough information out there, you find the truth. It reasons out. But it goes back to the propaganda thing that I was mentioning before. It's not about hearing what's really happening. It's about titillating the senses. And this is kind of what I like to hear. And so you can feed me as much propaganda as you like. And as you mentioned, that's the beginning of a loss of freedom and a big, bad road to death, destruction, hate, and even war. It happens.
Without question. You're so right on. It's kind of the end of it. You know, it's the end of it. The end of diversity is the end of everything that's important and great here. Obviously, conversations are a part of that, right? So it's actually interesting, Michelle. So there have been a lot of independent news sources, and I know you were you were canceled. One of your posts was canceled recently, or I guess it was a news link that you shared, right? And
I'm in the cancel club.
You're in the cancel club. Congratulations. It's almost like a badge of honor, you know, in some respect these days, because it's like, oh, well, she must have been telling the truth. She got canceled for it. But there's been a lot of, you know, obviously publications that have been complaining for years to the regulators about, oh man, Facebook is blocking this and it's blocking that. From a business perspective, they're blocking clicks to my site that I need to sell advertising dollars and to generate revenue for the business. News organizations make money on great content that attracts attention, getting that attention, serving an advertisement during the actual sharing of content. Cha-ching, that's one source of revenue, plus subscriptions, and then of course sponsored content and partnerships, right? That's the traditional way that news publications make money. So when those news publishers happen to, I don't know, be victim to a change in Facebook or Google's algorithm that stops the clicks from going to their website, it hinders their ability to make money, right? So Australia is trying to solve that, but it's totally not doing it. They're really missing the mark. Basically what Australia did was, in an effort to curb the power and the dominance of big tech, they're really the first mover on passing this law that makes Google search and the Facebook news feed now pay for content that's going to be featured on their platform. So if you're a publisher, if I'm, you know, MyMichelleLive and I'm a news publisher and I'm trying to get my news article on to Google search or in the Facebook news feed, I would have had to have a pre-negotiated agreement in place with these platforms that says, just by having this content on the site, I will get paid X amount of dollars just for it being there. So that's cool in one respect, because you're like, okay, well, I don't need to click to my content to get paid for it. All I have to do is just create it. So it sounds all fun and great, but this also now means that Google and Facebook and big tech can make not only decisions with their algorithm that might impact your ability to get attention to your content, but they could just choose to not have an agreement with you and to just not have something in place that ensures that you are able to access their users with your news information.
Well, that's why Parler was a good idea, because you just allow ideas. If something continues to be weird and false, it's going to be weird and false, and people are going to really start to recognize it, point it out, call it out, and say, wait a minute. You have that ability to have freedom, and it all kind of weighs out. Like we started this conversation, Adam, with the mask issue with places like Texas. You open it up and you give freedom. People gravitate to what really can work for them and what makes people feel safe, what is good business. We gravitate, it kind of evens out a bit.
Yeah, it does even out, as long as it's allowed to even out. I mean, you have to be able to get the content on there in the first place. And right now, what what Australia is trying to do with their new legislation basically makes it such that if you're not on this cool kid list of approved publishers, your content's not even there. So as we see kind of communications move over towards the United States, as we look at Australia as this guinea pig, it's important that we reject the idea of letting big tech outlets choose who is defined as a news source and who is not defined as a news source, because that will literally shrink the market and kill our ability to have that diversity of information and content. Literally, Michelle, 43% of Americans look to Facebook for their daily news, which kind of seems like an insane statistic that half of Americans look to Facebook for their daily update. But But that's
Are
just
we
the truth of
really
it. So if you-
surprised, though? I mean, think about
I
it.
mean,
Where did people get their news before Facebook and such? They got it from the late night shows, from freaking comedians, right? So
That's true. Yeah. Let me look at
Saturday
Johnny
Night
Carson real
Live,
fast, right?
what?
Yeah, let's like see what Johnny Carson has to say about this. You know, but literally news is about 4% of all content that you'll see on Facebook, but still half of Americans go to Facebook for their daily update. If Facebook's making decisions about who's defined as a news source and who isn't, man, we are in trouble. We basically just need this conversation to be specific to updating Section 230 so that everyone lives by the same set of rules, and then figuring out more of a creative solution for how to disassemble Mr. Potato Head when it comes to antitrust updates. Because these are century-old laws, you know? I mean, I'm not one for typically like regulation and government, this and that. I'm let the private market sort of figure things out. Sometimes businesses evolve to this upper state of just awesome dominance. And I mean, shoot, Michelle, we were complaining about Chrome earlier. It's like, I wish I didn't have to use Chrome, but like I use it because it's like typically really good. I know it's tracking my everything, but man, it offers me so much value. And it's like TikTok even, right? Like, oh my gosh, I know my information might be going straight to the CCP in China, but their algorithm for content matching is so good. Like they're always sending me, like showing me the videos that I want to see that like are funny. And oh my gosh, did you see what that cat did? Ah, you know, it's like the value that we get from that stuff is so good. But, you know, we got to reel it in too on the other side.
Well, I'm thankful that we still have a voice, and I think that's why shows like this, where we're having a free exchange of ideas, is important. You keep hearing something, and that's what the nature of propaganda, and then you say, oh, that must be true because these people say it, these people say it, these people say it. But sooner or later, sometimes the light comes on and you're going, wait a minute, there is more to the story. And that's the hope of our nation. Adam, I'm going to give you the final word.
Awesome. You know, the United States, we have a strictly limited federal government, and that's what makes us great. We have a robust Bill of Rights. We are all about minority rights, majority rule. You know, we have freedom of speech. We have civil liberties. We are allowed to ask questions of our government, and we should. The federal government today has been limiting political speech. It's been limiting our diversity of thought. And really, as we see, you know, crime sort of escalate, as we see crimes, really violence being directed towards minority communities, such as the anti-Asian crimes that we've seen, we have to ask ourselves a lot of questions about why, and don't take the first answer that we see. Look to primary data. Let's talk to those who are really our first generation Americans, because they're here for a very specific reason in a lot of cases, and that's why immigrants are so important to our country. First generation Chinese Americans are a great source of information. First generation Hispanic Americans are fantastic sources of information about why America is awesome and why other forms of government are not awesome. Talk to people from Venezuela, talk to people from Cuba, be open-minded and ask questions always, and fact check, but also know where the fact checkers are looking for their facts as well.
And listen to the Riz Report here on MyMichelleLive, because you'll get more to the story. We guarantee it. You don't like what you hear? Then don't cancel it. Debate it. Talk about it. Show me where we're wrong. That's perfectly okay. That's what freedom looks like.